Welcome to Uncomfortable, conversations about culture and Christianity. My name is Eric, and today I'm joined by Rachel.
Hey, y'all.
And Alex.
I'm gonna love you.
Oh my gosh. And Jess.
Hello, world.
I don't even have to say you're new or anything like that. You're just a regular. 2 weeks in a row. How's this chair feel?
Feels good.
How's the mic feel?
Happy to be here.
You're getting used to listening to your own voice in those headphones.
Getting adjusted to everything.
Saw a lot of proud people of you, this week on Facebook.
Yeah.
They're really loving your new adventure. So
thanks for all the support. Thanks so much. Shout out to my fans.
All your fans.
You might have more than us combined, so it's good.
Yeah, I think it's you're a popular choice. We're gonna have to put out another survey soon to find out which host they relate with most.
Oh,
and
yeah.
I'm sure you're just gonna
That's what you're putting a lot of pressure on.
Yeah, you're just gonna own that.
Yeah,
category.
we've done that before, and it has not been.
Mackenzie's gone. So just kidding. Just kidding, Mackenzie. If you're listening, that's not why you're gone.
Mackenzie.
She was a resident. She moved on. She's graduated her residency. I'm just making that clear.
Well, then it could have been like, who's left? Oh,
yeah.
Jess.
Yeah.
Guess we'll see how
she seems bored. We can put her in this room with a microphone.
Oh gosh.
So you have had good feedback. You feeling a little more comfortable this week, or
I feel good.
Okay.
Settling into the chair, figuring out how everything works. I think one of the things is just like sharing your voice and like your opinions, and knowing that they're going to be out there forever.
And just hearing your voice too. I mean, I still am not used to it. Like whether it's like preaching or a podcast or anything like that.
That was a little bit of a dig.
A dig.
Do you go back and listen to the podcast?
I listen, yeah. I usually listen to the podcast.
I don't go back and listen.
Yeah. Well, usually if you're wondering who's chatting with you on Facebook, most of the time it's me live during the podcast.
Oh, yeah.
So I'll go like watch it and kind of interact during it. And so, or like preaching, even if there's like a sermon clip or something, I'm like, do I sound like that? Wow. That's not what I picture. So anyway.
I can't help but point out that if you're watching this video now, and I mean, if you're listening, you don't notice, but Alex is wearing glasses.
Rocking
and it's throwing me off a little bit. And I couldn't tell because the frames are very close to what I'm wearing right now. And I couldn't tell if this was a way for you to come in and mock me a little bit today, or if you got a prescription, or if you just, I don't know.
These are not prescription glasses,
okay.
But it's 2020, so I'm all about that vision.
You're representing your 20.
For those of you listening and not watching, there is lenses in the frames.
Yeah, that's true.
Not just the frames.
Yep. Thank you.
All right. Well, so everybody doing well. Everybody staying healthy. Everybody got their masks on. That was a fun topic last week. If you didn't listen, just go back and hear us argue about masks. We got into a lot of yelling, throwing things.
Yeah.
It is kind of what I imagine when I read like Facebook discourse is like, yelling and fighting, but it's pretty civil.
A lot of copy and paste.
Yeah,
we did last week verbally.
Yeah,
so that's always fun. The mass conversation.
Yeah.
Copy and paste this, please. So
you always know that someone's copying and pasting into a Facebook comment when their vocabulary suddenly just like
not them.
Goes through the roof.
Who is this?
Like, wait a second. No, yeah. So last week was kind of our first episode back from our break. We have a little bit of a new format we're experimenting with, or not really even experimenting. We're just doing it. This is just the way it is from here on out. But yeah, we kind of are opening the show with a little banter. If you're not familiar, we're going to have our headlines coming up soon. And our topic this week is, about us being the church and the people being the church, and not the building. And how we've learned more about that because of the pandemic, and we continue to learn about that. So I'm pretty excited to get into that topic, because everybody really just got their notes. They're ready to go.
We're passionate.
They're all okay.
We're ready to go.
All right. Up next, headlines. All right, our first headline today is from CNN.com. It says, where some of the country's biggest school districts stand on reopening schools. This is one of many headlines. I think we're seeing this all over the country, including here in Omaha, as people are trying to figure out what this school year is going to look like. There's a lot of, a lot of varying opinions. There's a lot of uncertainty here. So, does anybody want to take off with this? Does anybody have something really passionate they want to share? Who's excited about sending their kids back to school? Who's nervous about them? Who doesn't have kids yet? Yeah, Rachel raised her hand. Yeah.
I feel like this last week, I don't know if anybody listening can relate, but this last week was so stressful for me. And I've learned to manage stress and anxiety well. And I felt all the feelings coming up. I mean, it was like waiting for different school districts to say what they were going to do, what their plans were. And then it's like I'm looking at my kids. What am I going to do? What's the right decision? Because there's not a right decision. So I was coming up against that of like, I could send them, I could not send them. There's pros and cons to both. I'm not going to judge either person. Like, that's just like a commitment that I made. And I think looking at this topic, we need to understand parents are struggling. Maybe you're not seeing it, but the conversations, the tears, the stress, like, is so real right now. And it's like, it's very difficult. So I'm still wrestling with this topic. I don't know if you guys have anything to add to.
Yeah, I saw one article kind of floating around Facebook that was, it was difficult to read because it was kind of talking about how this is going to cause like a class divide in some ways. And like, it was a very dystopian type of perspective. So I'm not saying I agree with it, but I'm kind of passing along their perspective. But it was almost like for people who can't afford to keep their kids at home, then their kids are going to get sick. Kind of. That was kind of like their perspective on it. And I mean, that's something that's just hard to read anyways as a parent, because especially like, our kids have been home since March? Yeah. And this is the first time ever that my kids have been asking, when do we go back to school? When do we go back to school? They ask Alexa, because their first day of school is August 20th. So they're asking Alexa like on the daily, how many days till August 20th? Like it's Christmas or something. Yeah. And it's crazy because they've never been that excited to go back to school after a summer break. So it's just, it's just so hard to deal with because you wonder if the responsibility is on you, to make, because I don't know. I think the mask thing is one thing. People are like, how are we going to regulate masks? And some people want to argue, well, the kids aren't getting sick. They're not, so they should be fine. And it's like, well, okay, but they could be carriers of it. Right. So they potentially could be spreading it, but
yeah, I think the more I think about it, the more like layered you figure out it is. I mean, educationally, like you said, financially, fiscally, it's for a lot of people, you probably don't realize how much, and no, I don't think anybody thinks school is daycare, right? Like, right. I don't think anybody actually thinks that, and there probably are some people, but how much you realize, hey, families have worked around, we can do this for the summer, we can figure out like our lives for the summer. Even like our family is like that because my wife is a substitute teacher because of our family situation, because I work on Sundays, Friday's her day off, and so a day off from like being with our kids and her day to go work at the school, and it's my day off at work. And so for us, like, our budget for the last few years has been really worked around that, and we save up for the summer, and now we're like, what's going to happen? And then knowing like our daughter's at risk, should she go into that kind of situation? And then you've got people that they've made it work for the summers. Now it's like meals, happen, and every school district's on like a different playing field even right now in the Omaha area. I know, like, literally my wife was telling me she's a part of this Facebook group. Shout out to you West Omaha moms that are out there that are part of it. But like they had to like shut down any further discussion. Now it's just an archive thing because how like heated and judgy and all of it's become. And so that was like one of her favorite places to like figure out, where's the best cereal on sale, or where do I get diaper? I don't know. All the discussion that happened on there, I don't know. That was probably very like stereotypical.
What's
bad
the
of me.
best cleaning product for my kitchen?
Yeah, sorry, that's not where I meant to go. But
wow, we talk about more than that. Kind of stuff, guys.
Okay, I'm a little flush right now. Okay,
hand me your shovel so you can finish talking.
Thank you. Anyway, so just they've had to shut it down because of everybody is trying to make that decision for themselves. I know, like, we've weighed homeschool or not. Our situation is I've got a son going into second grade who's kind of got school figured out. It was rough last spring when things were wrapping up, and my wife, she's got her master's in curriculum and education. She's like, I could do this for him, but then our youngest is going into kindergarten. It's just not the way you imagine your kid starting kindergarten, and we're already like emotional because it's like my first daughter going to kindergarten, and that's like a whole new world for me as well. So there's just like every time I think about it more and more, there's just so many layers. Yes. And that's just my family for two, and I can't even think about everyone else's family. Not even thinking about masks and the other stuff.
Yeah.
So.
Yes. And one thing I've thought as I've looked at people online, and maybe you guys can relate too, is if there's somebody that I don't necessarily relate to, it helps me to think like our kids are involved. So like Mama Bear comes out. I don't know what the equivalent of Mama Bear is for dads.
Papa Bear.
Papa Bear. Okay, Papa Bear. And so I'm like, these people are advocating for their children, and they are doing the best that they can. Yeah. And so with taking that level of understanding into it has helped me navigate some of those conversations. It's kept me from posting on different things, but it's hard.
Yeah, no one took a class, like a parenting class, for how to deal with pandemic with your kids.
Right.
That are
and I think you made the point too. Like, we expected it to be temporary. It was like, okay, we're ending school early and we're going to get through the summer. And we didn't at that point, August 20th was so far off. Like,
going to be normal again.
No.
Yeah.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Rachel, how do you feel about with all?
Well,
I don't have kids.
You have kind of a teacher's perspective.
Yeah, and you work in kids ministry, like you.
Yeah, no, yeah, I don't have kids, but I was a teacher for a little bit, and then I do have a lot of friends who are teachers, and just like, I don't know if this makes parents feel better, but like from a teacher's perspective, it's like heartbreaking for teachers too, because like if you think about it, teachers are more than just like putting education in kids' minds. Like, they want to care for kids, like the whole kid, like emotionally, all that kind of stuff. And so it makes it really hard to care for a kid when you're putting in a room. They can't leave the room all day. They have to stay away from all their other friends. They can't touch anything. Like, it's like a whole new world of teaching. And so I just have seen a lot of teachers just like really upset online, just trying to figure out, how can I care for these kids the best way that I can? Like, it's actually more like they are worried about their education, but they're more worried about their like mental health and like, relational health, and just like trying to figure out, what does that look like? And it's just made it really hard on teachers to figure out what's the best way to do this for kids. But I another thing that I've noticed is like the homeschooling route is kind of coming out of this. And I guess for me, like, I grew up homeschooled, and so to me, if I had kids, I'm like, well, yeah, that's like the easy choice. Well, also, I'm a teacher, so it is the easy choice. But I've talked to so many other parents who are like, I'm not a teacher. I don't have that gifting. That's hard. Like, that's scary for me to try and teach my kids what to do. And I think just realizing that there's people out there who are really worried to teach their own kids. It's just not everybody's
High school
gifting.
Math is scary. I wouldn't want to teach.
Right. But I think God is going to use, good in this, like he's been in all the other situations. And I know a mom who's a homeschooler, and she's been putting out resources for parents like, hey, if this is your first time, like, I want to help you. I want to give you resources and give you ideas and, come alongside you in this. But it is just such a hard decision. And, for people who can't, like, that's not even an option. Like, your kid just has to go to school and be in that situation. And that's that's a hard thing.
And this conversation, like so many that we've had. This is our second, or the second that I've been here for. But there's quite a bit of conversations happening right now, and there's not like an end to it. This is a continuing conversation that could change next week. So parents, teachers, we see you, we love you.
Well, and I think too, there's people that are saying, well, the school is set. Like I know the public schools in Omaha have even said like, well, we're not, if it starts to spread, we're just going to try to contain that class and like, figure out how to close it down. But I'm just like, there's so many opportunities for it to spread throughout the entire school. Like what are their contingency plans? That's just what I'm wondering. Like, are we going to get halfway through the fall and have all the schools closed down again because they're realizing that it is spreading? And I mean, I get the sentiment of, well, the kids aren't getting sick, but if they are spreading it and bringing it home to their parents, that's an issue as well, And it's just like, even that whole narrative is kind of just so messy because it's like, you don't want to like place all this blame on children and be like, well, you're bringing this virus home or whatever, and that sounds negative, but it's like, where do we apply wisdom to this? Who do we look to? I mean, and plus then we have kind of a rough idea of how this virus works, but then like below that, it's just everybody's opinions on it.
Right.
And so
exactly
where do people turn?
I had this moment last week that I'll share. I don't even think I've told my husband yet. So Ben, here you go.
You have time between now and when it's released.
I will. I was very like I would say like even distraught over what to do. And I went and my little 6-year-old Gavin was sleeping and I prayed over him and I was like, God, give me wisdom. Like, what do I do? And I just wanted that answer. Like I wanted the yes or no. And I heard like God just spoke to my heart and he said, I'm going to take care of you either way. So I was like, how's that helpful? But it's all, but it was
even if you're in a hospital bed.
But it's also fine. Like that reminder of like God's walking with us into the unknown in those hard decisions. Like we can trust his promises and his faithfulness. Like I'm going to be with you. That doesn't change, even though we don't know what's going to happen next week or this fall. So
yeah. And I think that prayer point is big because man, the weight on people's shoulders as they're making these decisions is like parents, school teachers, a lot of that paraprofessionals, all of it is so insurmountable. People feeding, at schools and all the jobs around that. And then, custodians and all the weight, like no one's trying to make these to like when we've had to cancel stuff as a church, like it breaks our heart. Like this is what we live for. Like we live for a baptism on the green. We live like to do the ministry, and though it's fun to get to do new things and have new opportunities open up, like for teachers and parents and kids, no one planned all this stuff to happen. And so these decisions are so difficult. And I think it is like one of those things that I think when we approach it with prayer, not just like, hey, God, I'm going to talk to you and unload on you, but like sit with him and then find our peace, get hitched to something that's more than like the decision that we make. And that's the thing that makes us mad sometimes. Like I sense that in you, like,
right.
I've given you some freedom in this and that,
yes,
I trust you.
Yes.
And I'm going to be with you. And that's frustrating sometimes.
Not only frustrating, it's scary.
Yeah.
I think
it's a mixed bag. The freedom can be scary. All right, let's move on to the next headline. This one's coming from Christianity Today.
Oh boy.
It says comedian John Crist, the biggest hypocrite was me. That's in quotes. Not me. I'm not the biggest hypocrite. So if you're not familiar with John Crist, he is I guess an online personality, lots of comedy sketch videos he puts out there that are kind of, I wouldn't say it's like mocking Christianity, but it's more of just kind of displaying the hypocrisy, of things in Christian faith and what churches do and people that attend church. And I mean, some of his stuff is pretty funny. Full disclosure, never been a huge fan of his, but I know a lot of people really love him. And so about 8 months ago, there was some issues that came to light. I think he had at least one, if not multiple people who had spoken out about some sexual misconduct that had happened with him, and he kind of disappeared. Now, 8 months later, he's back. He posted a video, and it sparked a little controversy because it felt like it wasn't the apology that everyone was kind of waiting for. It was more of just a, hey, I'm trying to be better kind of a thing, and that was kind of where he left it.
Yeah. So John, it's crazy. I watched it, so I will start with that. I watched it on Instagram, the day it came out. I honestly kind of forgot about him because there's been other things happening,
a few other things.
Yeah, and it's kind of let other Christian comedians kind of.
Yeah, I was gonna say I'm more of a
surface.
Trey Kennedy fan myself.
Okay.
So
I love that we're having this teams.
But yeah, so I watched it, and yeah, I did find some of his stuff humorous, and like he's kind of like a Babylon Bee of like sketch comedy and some funny stuff and all that kind of stuff, which was good. And he did bring by some of the hypocrisy, which is what he alluded to kind of in his video. Was like, hey, one of like what I did is my like what I made my living off of essentially, and my comedy career was based on like bringing out the hypocrisy in the church, and meanwhile I was living as a hypocrite. But as I watched it, I was longing, I guess, for more direct calling out of the sin that he did. I feel like and we don't know, and specifically, what he did, because it hasn't all been published, but I think it was kind of skating around that issue in some ways. I know in recovery, knowing people that have gone in recovery for a lot of different things, 8 months seems, though this last few months has seemed eternal, 8 months feels like pretty quick, and then I didn't feel like an apology towards like, hey, here's where I made some amends toward the victims or survivors or whomever they might be inside of that. I didn't hear like, how did the reconciliation part happen, there. It seemed very me-centric. So shout out to him for like coming on and like saying, hey, he did admit like, hey, I was a hypocrite and some of that kind of stuff. But I guess it left me, when I was watching, like wanting more, like rooting for, because I'm always rooting for redemption stories to happen. But that was for me. My feelings watching. Everyone else watch. What are your feelings? All the feels.
I haven't really kept up with everything that's going on. I know a little bit about the story, and honestly, when I first like heard what was happening, I was like, wow, 8 months, that seems like a long time. Like, when you think about like social media and like famous people or whatever, like to take 8 months off of like what you do as your job and your career to go and like try to heal from something, or like, like, I don't know. I'm not really comparing him to like a normal person. I'm comparing him to like a celebrity or someone who would probably just like, it would be a week and then they'd be like, I'm so sorry, everyone. And then they go right back to, whatever they were doing before. So to me, I was kind of shocked that that's how long, he waited to actually post anything. So I just was like, that's very interesting. And I think one thing that I thought was cool was just the support that came around him. As Christians, I think it's easy to be like, well, you're a Christian, you can't make any mistakes, you can never do anything wrong, and if you do, like, we're gonna shun you. And like, I just think that is a good picture of like, we actually, even when you become a Christian, you're gonna fail, you're gonna have struggles, you're gonna sin, like, you're never gonna be perfect as soon as you become a Christian. And so like, just having that grace for people is an important thing to remember, is like, we still have struggles, and we need to come around each other and encourage each other and build each other up and try to help in that way. So I thought that was kind of a cool, and like, even he said he was shocked by like, the community of people that he was around. He expected that kind of response to be like shunned or like kind of turned away from. And so I thought that was interesting.
I think there's a hesitancy for me to accept. It was hard for me to like, I appreciated his opening up, sharing, doing what he said in the video, but it's also hard for me to accept it, because it's like I know people that have have experienced things like he did to those women, and it's like, I'm like, do we just accept this back? Like, redemption stories are beautiful. I believe in that. I mean, Tuesday Night Ministries, like, we're working in redemption. Like, it's a beautiful thing. But then there was this catch of like, okay, something just didn't sit right with me with it. And I'm still kind of processing through what that is. I don't know if I maybe needed more, but it's like, as Christians, you know, if someone says, I'm sorry, there's like a wrestle for me there. Like, do we just accept them back? Like, to me, I need to see more. Like, it was like a 4.5 minute video, and I'm like,
I don't even think he said I'm sorry.
I need to see.
The thing.
Yeah,
it's like, it wasn't
I need
even
to see more. So he used, if you go back and watch the video, you guys can search it anywhere online. It'll come up. He used a lot of words that you would hear in from a recovery program, therapy. He's saying like, my actions were mine, they were no one else's. Like, I appreciated that, because I don't think people get to that place without accepting that they've done something wrong. So I could see him taking responsibility, but at the same time, I'm like, okay, with this subject, it's not, I mean, it's a serious subject when we start talking about sexual sin, and this is another continuing story of what's going to happen next. Is he going to tour? Like, what was I was curious at the end of it. What's your expectation of the people watching? Like, he had support, but
yeah.
Is it all over? It's like you felt like he was just like, okay, it's all over now. So like, you know, you
go
wonder,
back to normal and doing what he was doing before.
Is he asking for permission to start posting again?
Right. What was the
And I feel like he acknowledged, hey, I want to be a part of the solution, so I'm interested to see, like, hey, what does that look like? How do you become part of the solution moving forward, and all of those things. But I think the other thing in just Christianity and faith is, like, we love grace. Like, we are all consumers of grace, and we need to be givers of grace. And I think we only can wrap our minds around grace and mercy as, like, how those two play together, but also accountability and actually having consequences for actions is an act of God's grace. Like, God graces us not just by, like, forgiving us, like the eternal grace that he gives us, but our accountability and all of those things are acts of grace. Like, for me as a dad, it's an act of grace actually to punish my kid for them to be able to understand the lesson. It's justice is an act of grace. So justice and mercy are both a part of the bigger definition of what grace is. And so sometimes, like, grace doesn't always mean just a free pass. Jesus, like, didn't just come and say, all right, your sins are forgiven. No, he had to brutally die. Like, they had to be accounted for. There was accountability for sin. And so he doesn't just sweep it under the rug. And there's still, even though he took the weight of our sin and our guilt and our shame, there's still things I think we have to play out that are acts of God's providence and grace as well.
Yes, I agree. And I just want to say, if this has kind of brought up anything, if anybody's listening that's struggled with this area or something's coming up, we have an amazing men's ministry on Tuesday nights. I'm not just saying that men struggle with this like men and women do, but we have a great group that meets on Tuesday nights called Men of Integrity. They meet at 7:00 in the Student Center, and they deal with these issues. If you're struggling there, it's a very accepting, helpful, graceful group. And I would just encourage you to reach out to us or show up. We can get you connected.
It's a wonderful plug.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Well, we did, speaking of plugs, we had a former pastor on talk about his story on the podcast before. And so you can go back and search through that and listen to his story of redemption and all. So I love that. Like, he's one of my great friends. And so you root for redemption and you root for a time where someone can share their story and there to be that redemption. So it's not at all a not longing for that. And if somebody, I think the difficult part is when you're a leader perceived in Christian culture, and then it hurt. Like, I feel like it erodes people's trust in me in some ways, and it makes me upset, because there was a string of that happening over and over with a lot of pastors and Christian leaders, and like, I get to live in the shadow of that, and so it does. The wake of it is larger than often we realize, and so. And it hurt. Some people have really been deeply hurt by the church because of leaders taking advantage of
I think we've seen so much of it lately too. It kind of causes you to just have mistrust for leadership across the board. You're just kind of like, or anyone with power, I should say, not always leadership, but people who have a certain amount of power. You're just kind of like, are they trustworthy? Like, should I trust them? You know, that's, Jess, I mean, speaking of plugs, coming up in the not so distant future.
In the not so distant
soon, we're gonna be covering this topic a little more in depth.
So we could talk about this, for the whole episode today. There's just so many layers. And so, if you feel like we're not touching on something, this is something that we really care deeply about. We want to discuss and talk about. And so, in the next month, we're going to be diving more into this topic with a great guest and some more conversation around this. So
that's a tease. Just a little teaser there.
Yep. So there you go.
Yes. Anyways, up next, we'll be diving into our topic, which is us, the church. We are the church. That's what we're going to be talking about as we begin this conversation. This was kind of spurred because of the pandemic, because we've been having church at home, and now we've transitioned to kind of a split model. Some people are coming to the building, some people are still at home. But before we go too far into this, I think we need to define who and what is the church. I mean, we've obviously kind of hinted at it. I think we've been repeating it a lot around here, that the church is not a building, it's the people that make the church. But let's dive into that and explain it. Maybe let's make it crystal clear. I'm looking at you, Pastor Alex.
Pastor Alex. Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things that we've learned, throughout history is the ecclesia, the church is, God's a body of believers, people that are following Jesus, and it's taken a lot of different forms over the years. And I think historically, especially in the United States, we have a version of a program that oftentimes we consider church, but throughout history, the church has been a movement of people of God that are finding community, that are finding something inside of one another that they were built for. Like, we were all built by a communal God, Father, Son, Holy Spirit, a Trinity, to be in relationship with one another. And so the church has morphed in a lot of ways to meet needs and done some really good things. But there's things that have become probably over family-centric inside of a church that are just based around just those who are married and have kids, and a lot of our language, even foundation of the church has kind of drifted that way, and it's left people isolated that don't have that. And so the church was supposed to be a collective family outside of just a birth family. And so we're all adopted as sons. There's sonship and daughters into the kingdom that's already here. Like, we're a part of it now, and it's not yet. And so I think that's a quick definition of what the church is. And I think most people get that, but the problem, I guess, is what the church is not. What it is actually not, but we oftentimes refer to it as. And so I think the online kind of conversation has really pressed a lot of people into that conversation more, which is probably a good thing. And so, and I think one of the dangers, and we'll probably talk about this more, is a lot of churches have just jumped online without having really a clear definition of who they are, what their DNA is as a church. And then they've just jumped into this online, like, we're going to reproduce everything we've done and make it online, but they don't really have a good theology around what the church is. And does this match our theology? Does being online, like, I have friends who lead churches that decided not to do a live gathering or not broadcast a live service, and I have a tremendous amount of respect for them because they didn't just do it reactionarily. They're like, as elders, we're going to get together. We've said before we're not going to do this because of how we define church and what we see God's call in our lives. And so we're not going to just be reactionary. And that's bad leadership. If you've told people in your church, hey, this isn't something we believe in. This is how we see ecclesia happening in a certain way. And then a pandemic hits and you just flip. I think that's bad leadership to not at least have prayer about it and to slow down and lead in there. So I think that's another flip in that conversation. But I'll talk a little bit more about it because I do have a passion, and I gracefully disagree with some of how they would frame it and the dangers they say in the online community and what church is. So
yeah, I think that's a good point that you make of just like what people think church is, because I mean, honestly, to me, when I think of like church, I think Sunday morning, I think 3 worship songs, and I think a guy up on the front of the stage like teaching everybody. Like that's literally what I think of. And so I think that's so true, is like whenever this all happened, it's like, well, okay, well, we got to do church somehow, and we got to bring all of these things to everyone, because that's what church is. It's 3 worship songs and a pastor teaching, and so it's like, okay, we'll just put it online and that'll be our church. And I think obviously everything happened so fast and people were just trying to figure out what to do so that we could continue, moving forward together as a church. But I do think back and I'm like, man, how cool would it be if we would have just stopped and like everybody just think, well, what is church? Like, what if we poured all of our resources into helping like people meet together in their homes? And like, what if we poured all our resources into like helping people, build up like communities of believers that meet each week, obviously within like the under 10 people, or just like, whatever you could do. But I think it is so easy to just quickly jump to the fastest, easiest way to get stuff out to people, instead of having that deep like theological thinking of like, oh, actually, what is church? Is it just a production, or is it like more than that? And so I think that's a really good point that you're making.
Anyone else? Jess, I know you.
I agree.
You disagree.
I agree. I don't know. I mean, I went to Bible college, and so I have sat in classes where I've heard professors say like, we are the church. So that's kind of ingrained in my thought. I don't know if you feel the same way, Alex, but I often think that. And so for me, it's we are the churches made me more adaptable to when this happened. It made me a little more adaptable to online church, kind of thinking that way. And I've processed that. To me also, we are the church is giving our garbage guys Gatorade on a Friday morning, and giving somebody a quarter at Aldi's is like being the church, like looking for those opportunities and sharing Christ's love. But I agree with you,
bringers of the kingdom.
Yes.
That's good.
Preach it.
Yeah, that's good.
So a lot of the verbiage after like some of the pandemic restrictions have been lifted has been, churches reopen. You've seen that.
Yeah.
A lot of places. I know. I think here we've tried to kind of deliberately avoid that phrase of saying, the church is open again or whatever, because we didn't want to communicate that we were ever closed. Things definitely changed. We did things differently, but the church never. Closed.
Right.
But it's so ingrained in, like, even as like a pastor, like it's so ingrained in me to speak like that language, to like speak like, man, my kids haven't been to church in, however many months. When they came back, to it, even though we've been a part of groups and community and all that, like, even though I believe something, I'm like so conditioned to think that I work at a church or I work for a church, and to think of it as a destination and not just like and I think that one of the good things hopefully we're learning is like, we have to correct how we speak about it, because we are some of the people that teach it wrong accidentally, just in how we speak and how we talk and how we promote gatherings here and our programs. And so when people freak out that we get rid of a program, well, that's partly us, because we've ingrained that into people that you go to church once or twice a year, you're a CEO, you go to Christmas or Easter. But so I think that's something I think we'll have to continue as leaders and people that are a part of the church, that get to be leaders in the church, have to continue to think about. So,
well, yeah, and it's just wording too, how we have like the verbiage of church. Like, you wouldn't say like, oh, I finally get to go back to the body of Christ. Like, you're in the body of Christ. You're already a part of the body of Christ. But it's just like that verbiage of like church is now a location in a building. It just changes your perspective of things. And yeah, it's just you gotta kind of rewire your brain almost on how you think about it.
I think we've seen a lot of different feedback from people. You know, some people have enjoyed the online experience. And then there's the, you know, polar opposite where it's like, I need to get back to see people. I need to get back with my, you know, with community. And I think both viewpoints are completely valid. I think a lot of it might even have to do with personality types. I think the extroverts are dying to get back with people.
Yeah.
The introverts are kind of like, oh, this is kind of always what I was wishing it could be.
Yeah, this is my sweet spot.
Yeah, this is great. I'm not, you know, I can't help but feel like a little concerned about the transition, not just for our church, but church at a whole across the country. This has opened up this big gate for people to kind of just slip out the back door.
Oh yeah.
And I think that I think pastors are aware of it. I'm pretty sure they are. But I don't hear a lot of people talking about it. And maybe it's because they're scared if they talk about it, people are going to get the idea. And, you know, I'm pretty sure if someone already had the idea, they had the idea. If they're going to do it, they're going to do it. But it is this thing of, here I have not been coming into the building where the church meets. And now it's starting to open up, but as far as they know, I'm just online, you know? And so it's like eventually, you know, maybe I just won't go back. And I think I've heard different reasons for that too, you know, like, well, I'm, you know, until there's a vaccine, I'm just not going to public gatherings. Like there's people who have that viewpoint. Or maybe they've had a crisis of faith in this and, you know, they've struggled through it and decided that, you know, maybe they came out on the other end and decided they weren't going to come back. But I think this is that time where it really challenges the church and its leadership to be innovative, to try to reach those people. Because if people are struggling with this stuff, we do need to think about more than just putting out there what we do on a Sunday morning and just putting that in their living room and going, well, hopefully that works because that's what you've been experiencing. But technically it's not.
Yeah.
Well, yeah. And you think about like, well, what was their experience before? Like what would keep them coming back? It's not necessarily the online experience that they're having. It's probably the people or the community that they're with. And if they weren't with a group of people or community that was supporting them and you know, encouraging them and building them up before, and now they're online, there really isn't, I mean, there wouldn't be that much that was keeping them. And I just think about, I'm in a small group and like, I wouldn't leave because, well, obviously because I work here, but I wouldn't leave because
it's the only reason.
Yeah. But because those people are like my community and my relationship and they are a part of this church and like, I want to stick with them and be in community with them. So yeah, it kind of almost starts to make churches hopefully question, like, what are we valuing? What is most important? And what are we, you know, are we putting all of our eggs in one basket and we really shouldn't be putting them in this basket?
Yeah. Well, I think I think the gathering on Sunday morning and a lot of the things that we have created that we've taken as the church are still valuable because they're liturgies that have been in our lives. And liturgies, simply put, we associate it with church, but they're heart-shaping practices. They're the practices that we do in our lives that shape and we orient our lives around. So for some people, their greatest liturgies are youth sports. Their entire life is run around youth sports. And so if anything is going to step on that, then that something else will come second to it. And so I think for a lot of people, the liturgy of gathering here, hearing those 3 songs, hearing a message preached from God's word, going to a prayer room, shaking hands, all those kind of things are liturgies that in a very real way helped us connect with God. And so for people that had built those as liturgies in their life as a way to connect with God, and then your liturgy is removed, we've seen this not just in the church, but in baseball practice, what we talked about earlier in school, when the things that shaped your life and your heart and your passions are removed, there is going to be a sense of loss. And so I think it's an appropriate thing to grieve as well about those and not just say, hey, we wouldn't just, that's all stupid, because there are biblical reasons why we do a lot of this stuff, and why we've created these liturgies. And these liturgies were created to serve us, but a lot of times we serve them. I think simply put, like communion, it's a gift from God to engage our senses, like a great gift. Like he could have just said, think about this every so often, but even that we get to taste it, and it goes into our body, and we get to feel it in our mouth. Like it's a grace of God to give us these liturgies to be able to understand God even more. And so I think those are great, deeply meaning things that are meant to serve us, for us to be like, man, God, you are so good. But oftentimes what we do is we serve them, and then they don't no longer shape our hearts. And so those patterns get difficult as well. But so I think it's a good thing, that people's hearts are longing for it. And sometimes we just don't know how to help steer towards, no, but God is ever present and he does want to be with you and all that. And so because we've built that as too much of a reliance, then I think that's where the danger comes.
And I think that also is, for us as parents, it's part of raising our kids, is having them involved and teaching them. It's like, I want my kids to look back and have been involved in it. And it's, now that it's different, it's like, how do we engage our children in that? We're used to taking them somewhere. My son's he loves to sit and listen to Mark on Sundays. And so it's just, that changes too.
Yeah. Well, I even think about during this time, like worship, it's just not the same. Like you're in your living room and it's on a TV and it's like you and two other people kind of just sitting there like singing. You can't really get the volume loud
enough to drown out your own voices.
It's just not the same. And I just know, like when I came back for the first time and got to worship with everyone in the same room, it was just like, I just cried, because I was just like, this is just so powerful and beautiful, and just like being in person with people, there's just something about it. And obviously, it's in the scriptures, like God desires us to worship together and come together and sing and praise him, and there's just so much value in that.
One of the things about Christ Community Church is they've been online for a number of years now, at least almost 10 years, I think.
Yeah. And
the service has been available to people either live or on an archive after the fact. I think we see trends moving towards, on-demand entertainment everywhere we go. But is online, on-demand church, is that something sustainable for the body of Christ? Is that, at what point, yes, you're learning, you're probably bettering yourself, you're going further in your Christian faith, but like, is that actually being the church? Is that like, can I get the community that I need out of a chat room? Like, is this sustainable?
Yeah.
I could rant all day, so I'll let you guys talk.
You don't want us to just...
I think one thing that I've heard from online church is like, just maybe pastors being like, well, we can reach so many more people. Like, we're reaching so many people. But I guess to me, I'm like, well, you're reaching people, but are you bringing people into the family of God? Like, there's a difference between reaching people or like having them, skim past your video and kind of see, a little like couple seconds of it. Or are you actually like bringing people into the family of God? Like, that's where they're actually going to like experience God and realize like this is a life-changing thing. And not saying that online can't change people's lives, but I just think there's so much more power in like bringing people into your community. And like, obviously there's some online people that are on this podcast and they are, gifted in that, and like God has gifted them.
I am a real person, okay? I am not an online
You're an online person. Okay. You're just a Bitmoji to me.
Yeah, I am sitting right here.
Okay, but you, Rachel, are bringing up the thought in me of, okay, we're looking at, pastors and people at churches looking at like how we're going to reach these people and how we're going to bring them in. But what's my response as somebody that's on the other end of it? Because part of it is like, I need to commit that, like, these are my options. These are the things that are out there. There's some churches in Omaha, CCC, that are doing it pretty well. And I can see that. And so it's like, part of it is like us committing to being part of that body. And like, what's our response in it? Are we looking to just like be served? Like, what's the church service that has the most likes? It's going to come up as the one that I choose. Like, I don't know. That to me is in it too. Like, we have a responsibility not to just be a consumer, but to have a commitment and be a part of it. Cause it's like, how many people are watching the live video? Like, you can go and you can watch an online service on Monday or Tuesday. And it's like a church that's doing online well. Like, I know, Alex, you can speak to this. It's not just a Sunday job that you're engaging with people online. It's a commitment. And so you're able to have a relationship when you look at it that way. Thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I think it has forced the church to think more innovatively about we are bigger than 1 hour a week. You know, people live 168 hours a week, and how can we be in those places? I think the church, I think one of the things we have to do is step back and realize, because I think the technology thing scares us, because there's a lot of bad stuff, yes, on the internet, and it's foreign to us, and so we have to look back into church history at how technology has been leveraged for the gospel. If I ask you what's your favorite Bible verse, the reason you can answer me is because of technology, because no one wrote chapters and verses. You know, it was because we used something that needed to put it together, and we needed to use a system built culturally for us to be able to understand and archive and put in context what scripture was. And so you're using technology to even do that, or to even know, because people put these together in this thing called a Bible that used the printing press for the gospel to go forward. And yes, also because of that, pornography and a lot of evils were able to be introduced into the world. Jesus came on the Roman road system, which at that time was just technology. And so we know that we serve a sovereign God. The letters that Paul had and the ability for them to last and get from one place to the other on paper, like all those things to us that are not even close, like we're like, that's not a technological advance. Man, in all of those were open windows for sin to wreck the world. Human trafficking, slavery, a lot of evils happened in each of these points. But all of our lives, I don't think we understand, have been enhanced by technology. Like my dad, for example, and my mom, how their marriage worked way back in the day was dad would get his lunch pail, go to work, and come see mom at 5:30, right? Like my marriage is enhanced because I can text my wife throughout the day, see how she's doing. She can say, hey, can you pick this up on the way home from work? And so we can dialogue throughout the day. And that actually enhances our in-person intimacy, intimate relationship.
That's a great point.
Rather than just rejecting it. So I think we have to realize more fully how technology in our everyday lives is something that benefits our relationships across the board. And yes, it can damage them. Like, yes, there are evils, but how are these things redeemed? Like how has marriage grown better because of this? And yeah, how has this wrecked marriages? Because you can slide into someone's DMs. They're both very, so the medium, the method is not the evil, but it's what we choose to do with it. And how do we continue to say, this is a place that we need to redeem. This is a place that the gospel needs to go forward. And so there are more places that we're able to reach and to stream. And then we also, the thing that it's hard is we have to realize no one comes unless the Father compels them to come. And so our call is to be obedient. Yeah. And then I have to rely on the Spirit. Every time I preach, I'm like, man, I want there to be all these responses, and like the Lord keeps reminding you, just got to be obedient to what I'm calling you to do. And it's not like you're not powerful, dude.
It's like I hate to break it to y'all, but the Holy Spirit can convict over Wi-Fi. Okay, like it's not an in-person thing. Like, I mean, I think you look at, I think leaders have even to some extent prioritize time alone, time away, time to have thoughts to yourself and to study. And I know a lot of times when you're talking about studying, that's like immediately people go, oh, I'm reading a book, I'm reading the Bible, I'm reading a commentary, I'm reading. And it's like, but in the age of podcasts, YouTube, all this stuff, we have all this wealth of knowledge that is at our fingertips that we can consume in different ways. And it's like this, I think a lot of this has come up because of the pandemic. And I think in this time, like we can learn that this this can be good. This can be valuable. You know, we may be a little more isolated at times, but like this is an opportunity for us to grow in ways that we probably wouldn't have otherwise. And it's trying to find that the cup half full mentality in all of it, instead of going, oh, well, my freedoms are being taken away. Like, okay, Paul was in prison. He would have loved to have a Zoom call, you know, like he would have loved to have that form of community, but he didn't even get that, you know? So it's just like, we may be isolated, but things that can happen online, they're not going to replace that in-person feeling. They're not going to replace that feeling that you get when you worship with other people around you. That's not going to be replaced, but there is something there. There is a place for it. It's something that we can't dismiss.
Well, yeah, and like Alex was saying, it was like with your marriage, it's like it's not in place of your marriage. You're not just texting back and forth and never like having in-person
that's not how 4 kids happened. Yeah. Wasn't just through text message.
Yeah. Exactly. So it's working with that.
You're like, I'm so happy I'm not Aaron right now. I'm not looking forward to her conversation after this podcast.
Yeah. So I think people can easily get caught up in like, it's taking over. Like, this is what it's going to be like forever. Like, we're going online. Like, no one's ever going to meet in person. But it's like, right now, this is the key time for us to use this as a tool to help us engage. And like, you know, me and Jess even did like a Facebook group together with a bunch of other women. And like, that was so encouraging for me in that time of like, I can't go anywhere. I can't really see these people or be even in a big group with these women. But like, we still got to communicate and learn and grow together over a Facebook page, which was like, that never would have been able to happen before. And so that's just so cool. But it doesn't replace, obviously, like the in-person stuff. It just enhances it, like you were saying, Alex.
Yeah.
I mean, speaking as someone who when I was introduced to my wife, I was technically introduced to her online. She lived in Council Bluffs, Iowa. I lived in Rapid City, South Dakota.
So you're an online person.
And so, yeah, because I'm an online person.
You have an online
But
marriage.
I mean, we chatted for like an AOL Instant Messenger for like 3 months
A little
at
door
least.
opening.
Maybe 6 months. Yeah, before I don't know, it was a long period of time before we actually even met face to face. And it's one of those things where it's like, I realize it's different, but it doesn't mean it's bad. Like, and I think that's the thing that with technology, we always face that hurdle. I mean, it's like when the radio was invented, like some people thought this was the evil technology. You have people like the founder of this church, R.R. Brown, who used that to spread the gospel.
True.
You know? And so it's just like, there's always an avenue that we can use this stuff for good, and it no matter what it is. And every time something new comes along, there's always those people who are going to be on the fringe and are going to be afraid of it, or going to say it's bad or it's scary. And I get that when you don't understand something, it can be intimidating, but our reaction should never be that it's evil right away. Like, when something new is presented to you, that does not mean new is bad. And I think anything that takes us out of our normal rhythms, or that we're intimidated by because we don't understand it, our immediate reaction is to go, well, that's bad. Or, I mean, anything like that. I mean, the things that we can do today because of science would have been looked at like witchcraft in the past. Like, if I were to time travel and show my laptop or my phone to somebody, I'd probably get burnt at the stake or something for being a wizard. I don't know, but it's just one of those things where we don't have all the answers right now. And I think even us as a church, we have these conversations about what does church online look like, before the pandemic, during, and after, in the future. How do we make this something that is part of the whole experience of the body of Christ?
Yes. And I think, Eric, you might have shared an article from Carrie Newhoff.
That wasn't me. I think it was Alex.
It was you. But it was written in November 2019. And one of the things he says in it, he's talking about online church. Is it a distraction? Just kind of having the conversation. And one of the things he says in the article is, I'm waiting for the day when virtual reality replaces the act of gathering physically. And not, 6 months later?
Yeah.
That's the reality.
Yeah.
I think he's experiencing that.
I think he might even be speaking a little bit about actual virtual reality.
Oh, really?
Which
I've gone to one of those before.
Yeah, it's totally a thing. You can have a VR church, and people are experimenting with it. I think there is I don't want to just put it under a youth culture, because I think it's more than Gen Z, but I think a lot of people a lot of people who are in that spectrum of maybe being more of an isolationist, an introvert, like they go to online communities on the regular. Like that's who their community is. They might have friends across the country that they've never met, and you know their screen name is Rainbow Unicorn in 99, and that's
how'd you know my
sorry. Oh, that's you I've been talking to. So but it's just one of those things where like that's their community, and they get joy out of it. They get friendship, they get companionship. People get their lives have been saved. The people have been, you know, on the point of suicide and been talked away from that because of an online community. They have found their tribe online, and it's not always church, but sometimes it is. And it's one of those things where like, how do we as the church utilize this thing that we've been given? Like Alex mentioned, the road system, you know, like how do we utilize this for good? And I think that to discredit it, I mean, a lot of pastors are the extroverts. So a lot of them are not going to empathize as well with the introvert who is wanting to meet online and wanting to have that safer feeling experience. I mean, I run the social media accounts here at the church, and I can't name the amount of times that we've had a message come in to Facebook from someone who probably wouldn't have called us, who probably wouldn't have walked in the front door, but they felt less intimidated and they felt safer approaching us that way. And I know Alex can speak to this on numerous occasions where people's lives have been changed because of that.
And I think one of the, so there's people called digital ethnographers that study all this kind of stuff, and like people's addictions to technology and games and all that kind of stuff. And there's a gal named Dana Boyd that does a lot of this, and she talks about like, if you take away the connection, you take away the internet from a kid's video game, their cell phone, all of the things that they do, they're not addicted to the device, they're addicted to the people on the other end. And no longer are we bound to be physically present. I mean, bound to be present where we are physically, or no longer are we actually physically, like, just because we're somewhere doesn't mean we have to be there at the same time. So I could be preaching and people could be Netflixing like live there. It doesn't mean they're actually engaged in the conversation. And also because they're not here physically doesn't mean that they can't be journeying along and the Spirit can't be working through them in that way. And I think for the church, it's a golden opportunity, knowing we believe that we are people created for community, and the thing that people are searching for and they're longing for in their devices, in their connection, is the thing that we better be the best in the world at. We better be the best in the world at providing that community, that need being met. And so there's a great need of people logging on to porn sites or video games just to have fun, and the underlying core need that they have is community, because they were designed and built for that. Like, that's by their creator, and they don't even know that's what they're longing for. And so to be in that space and to bring hope and community and resurrection and the gospel to that space and life for what people are actually searching for, you can't. And so because what they're not doing, the front door to the church isn't outside of the atrium, folks. That's not the front door to the church. That's like step number 12. Almost everybody I meet is like, I'm like, hey, how did you find our church? The internet. No one is walking into our church building that's under probably 70 even without being to our Facebook page or our website first. They're not even walking through the door. And so I think that's why having excellent stuff in this arena is a big deal, and I think it matters for the church. I think it matters to God to do those things with excellence and to minister to people in that way.
And one thing is, like, we're getting in people's homes as well. Like, one thing that we've noticed, like, on our kids team that's been amazing is, like, as we've done kids ministry on a video and sending families, resources to do in their home, we've had people commenting, oh, we've never like experienced a kids ministry in our home like we have now. Like, this has been amazing. Like, we've gotten to see what our kids are learning and like be with them and ask them questions. And like, so it's like, stuff that normally would just be kept in, the building and kind of maybe over in one area of the church. It's like now it's in people's homes and they're getting to engage with it and see it in their home in a new way. And I just think that's so cool that we can do that obviously through the internet and through videos online.
Yeah, stuff that's not live. Like that's been the experience for my family. My kids have shown up to this building week after week, and then I pick them up, and they have a great time, and they can tell me a little bit about what they learned. But now I can watch Milo and I can watch Bryant and the people that they actually are hearing from, either with my kids at that time or before or after, and then my conversation with them is all of a sudden more robust because we had a shared experience. And so shared experience with your family, it's like a mission trip. Somebody comes back from a mission trip and they're like, "This was awesome," and then you're like staring at them like, "Sounds cool, dude." And you're showing them the photos, but that shared experience,
that continues.
Yeah, it's a game changer. So
that's awesome.
Great conversation.
You convinced me.
Good job.
To have church online. No, I think this is all valuable, and I think we're all trying to kind of process it and figure it out. And I think the excitement is in person. A lot of times, the excitement in person can't be replaced online. But like we said, I think it can supplement it really well.
Yeah.
And like you said, Alex, I think the ultimate goal is to meet in community.
Make disciples of Jesus for kingdom impact.
There it is. All right. Thanks everybody for having this conversation today. It's been good. I think that sometimes people might still have more questions. So if you do, you can reach out to us, send us an email to podcast@cccomaha.org, or you can reach out to us on social media @cccomaha. We'd love to hear from you. If you have a story you'd like to share, or, maybe you just have a critique or a compliment, we'll take that too. If you're listening on iTunes, we'd appreciate you leaving us a review there. But other than that, thanks everyone for joining us, and we'll talk to you next time.